Hi, everyone. This is Fei Wu from Feisworld Media and Feisworld Podcast. And today's episode is a special one because here I have Julia Holloway. I have my partner and co-host Adam Leffert joining me after 10 years. Julia, after 10 years of being first interviewed on Feisworld in 2015. She was, I think, part of the first 10 episodes, believe it or not, Julia. Now we have over 350 episodes.
I am so happy to see you and really celebrate everything that you've accomplished and get to be here and talk about where we are in the world right now.
Oh my goodness. It's going to be a very exciting conversation. And I just want to mention, Julia, before we get started, back in 2015, I'm not sure if you remember, but we talked about leadership and coaching, spirituality, and what it means to show up fully in your work and your own personal life. And fast forward to 10 years later, your voice, in my opinion, is getting clearer and more resonant. And I'm just very excited that we get to sit down again. And more importantly, we started working together, and one of the courses that you launch, and there'll be many more after this, it's called Executive Presence, Small Moves, Big Presence. And it's about the subtle, powerful shifts to help leaders, especially in high stakes meetings, build trust, inspire confidence, and lead with calm clarity. I love that. So in this conversation, we can unpack what's changed in your approach in the past 10 years, what executive presence really means and looks like, not only just in in-person meetings, but in these like Zoom calls, hybrid meetings, and rapid communications, and how anyone, regardless of their title, their age, experience, can cultivate their presence as a practice, not as performance. So I would welcome any.
Not Faye. That's practice and not performance. Did you just coin that just now?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think as I was reading that, I was like, I think there's something really to it,
I
not
love it.
as a practice, not as performance.
Yeah. This is
And
the
then,
name of our new book. Okay.
all right, let's put a pin in it. And Adam, by the way, since you're here, I remember because Steven Shapiro says something very similar, right? Kind of innovation as a practice, as not as a habit, not as an event.
Right,
Um,
process, not an event, because you have an organization that you want to work with, you get all excited, you want to deliver the biggest value, and then you go home and wait for the phone to ring. So maybe that's not the most helpful for the client or for your own business.
yeah.
Love it.
So actually, I'm going to kick it off with that. Something really resonated with you, Julia, and I think that's how you run your business. I'm just going to start with a slightly different first question, as I promised you. So why did it hit so hard when I say practice, as practice, not performance?
Because we're, as leaders and just people, whether we're leaders of our own businesses or our families, or we're in a more traditional, either a profit or a nonprofit kind of a role, everything is about how we come across through our bodies. Our bodies are the vehicles through which we emote, communicate, sense. And so when I think about presence, it's the number one coaching issue that leaders come to me to have some help in some form or another. And so I don't want us to be thinking about presence as performance, just like you said. It is a practice, and it is a reflection of who you are and what's important to you. And so as we think about ways to, quote, improve, right? Because often we're in a state of needing and wanting to get better at something. We need to think about the ways in which we're embodying presence on a moment to moment basis.
So lovely. I really enjoyed that as well. I think about even the meeting I had just before this. It's quite deep. So let's rewind on Julia. Let's see, what were you focused on back in 2015, and now 10 years later, how has your journey evolved in the past decade?
What a great question. And it's interesting, too, to look back to 2015, because the world has changed a lot and
Mhm.
coaching has also changed. So when I went to coaching school back in 2012 and you and I started talking, for me, it was all about learning a methodology, improving my listening skills, helping clients uncover what I believe they already had inside of them in terms of helping them solve and move forward on issues. I would say in the decade that's passed, coaching has changed, and you'll see that a lot in Europe. And what's happening really is a deconstructing of methodology, right? I mean, it's important to have a way in which we go about helping our clients, but the idea that there is a kind of a set of tools that you can apply over and over again, what I would say is those tools are starting to disappear into the background a little bit more. And what it's about now is being able to work with a client to hold complexity and to help clients build capacity. So maybe we could add those two words to practice and performance, because that's what folks are up against. So there is less of a focus on, boy, we start with a problem, and by the end of a session, we have a co-created solution, and much more about how can we discover between us what are the complexities at play, and in what way can I help a leader hold more and more of those complexities in order to come out with what I hope is a simple, not simplistic, but a simple way to move forward based on holding all those threads.
This is wonderful. Adam, I'm going to remind you, since you're a co-host now, you need to look into the camera and not at Julia while she's talking. Look into the
Okay.
camera as much as you can, as well as you can look at the document for questions, but when you ask it, try to look into the camera if you can. Thank you.
Yeah. So I have a follow-up question on that.
Go for it.
So you mentioned complexity, Julia, and knowing you and knowing that you also involve business as well as spiritual practice, I'm wondering, are there sort of paradoxes or conflicts within the various things that a person presents with rather than just complexity being a bigger pile of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So as opposed to sort of seeing it right as like a Mr. Potato Head, right, with all of the different challenges kind of stuck on to the side of the potato. I think that's right. I think as I've evolved my own practice, what can happen is noticing with a client together a set of patterns that might make themselves clear in a session, so that exactly we're not saying, oh, wow, there's 20 different threads and I have to hold them all, but wow, 5 of these threads really are coming from the macro system at play. And, now we're going to work towards those patterns and try to understand what's really within the client's control versus what is in the bigger system at play, and how can I begin to differentiate, you know, coming out of a session, as the client, what can I control? What do I have agency over? And how can I start to look at the complex tangle, right, of challenges from that perspective? And I think you're right. Then I think some of those things can quiet down and they start to peel away, and a way forward begins to emerge.
Yeah, there's so much to go with that. I guess I've heard from you a little bit as we worked earlier, but I'm curious about the macro system. What are
Mhm.
the sorts of things that are involved in that?
It's happening right now to us, and I just noticed last week, for instance, that there were all kinds of snafus happening in parallel with meeting times and uh, different things that were happening where it was unclear, what was the invite and who was on first when. Of course, some of those things just have to do with technology and what we're dealing with in terms of how we work globally and connect. But I think that there was really something much bigger going on in the macro system in terms of, as I've said to you before, it's almost like tectonic plates are really shifting, especially as we're really questioning what are these institutions, what perspectives do we look from. And I can feel just in the day to day how that rearranging is starting to show itself in the day to day.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're stepping into something really interesting, and I feel like I need to add a question as well because Julia, you work with not only a number of clients, but also I notice that they're in very different industries, and dare
Yeah.
I say, right, even if it's the same client, depending on the departments, the cohorts, they really have very different needs. So I believe maybe at the macro level, some of the complexities are drastically different, and I think you're that's what where your skills come into play is not to dissect and break down something, oh, aerospace and we're at, higher education, but how do you kind of tune yourself to figure that out for different people? Do you find it exhausting? Do you find it invigorating? And I'm just curious.
Whoa, Faye, you're asking so many questions inside of there. Let me see if I can tease a few of them apart. First, I do think that, working in all kinds of different sectors requires being attuned to what I would say the nuances of challenges that those sectors present, for sure, right? A manufacturing sector is going to be different from the consulting sector. And sometimes, though, the themes are more similar than you think.
Hmm.
It's really the language that's different. So in a pharmaceutical company, you've got to understand what are the phases to trial and how does R&D work. But kind of effectively, what we think about in all of these industries is what's value creation, right? And what is it that leaders and organizations are thinking about in terms of what's their vision and identity, their value proposition, to use a little more formal business language. And at the end of the day, what is the value creation for the customer? So when I'm approaching my work, I'm thinking along the lines of what's that through line in terms of what that organization is bringing to market. And then usually what I'm trying to do is to notice the patterns and then thinking about organizational alignment so that an organization can be, efficient and effective. But what interests me even more lately is what does a leader need to do, change, do start, stop, continue, dial up, dial down, learn something new in order to support the system depending on the stage where that system is. So usually it's about, to your point, um, again, back to simplifying, right? It's not simple, but simplifying the patterns and the themes, decoding some of the language, right? And then helping leaders understand the way in which their leadership is going to be impacting and affecting the trajectory of what they're trying to create in their orgs.
Mm, really interesting. So let's dive in a little bit about the course, the first mini course where people really
Yes.
get to experience from you. And then that's something that we developed together, and we're very generous in offering it for free. So I hope people really get to check it out. And the title is Executive Presence. And I know you're someone believe in micro moves. So Adam and I really want to kind of approach you to talk about, what inspired you to create the course and the structure. You don't have to remember word for word, but like the before and during and after a meeting, I find that particularly interesting as well. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on creating such course.
Thank you for asking. It's funny. It actually connects to the first question you asked me, which is, I think in the beginning of my practice, I had I had a sense that clients need tools, tips and tools. Another one of those things, efficiency and effectiveness. That was the value creation to my work. So what's interesting about executive presence is, I spent the last decade really undoing a sense that there is a specific set of tools to improve executive presence. As a matter of fact, it really doesn't ring true with how I like to work with clients. However, um, presence, it's soul work. Presence is soul work. And developing presence over a period of time is a long-term commitment. And so how do I help clients have a taste, just to go back to practices? What's a taste of some practices that clients can put into play right away? And yet those same practices become a pathway to what I'm going to say is the greater good of more presence, right? More presence, the better. So it was really fun to craft this course in a way that helps folks get their hands around something tangible. So it was really started with, again, that idea of simple. What are some steps in a particular setting that I could help clients with? So we decided for this course to take a formal meeting structure. That's something that many folks can relate to, right? I'm coming into a conference room. So it doesn't have to be a boardroom, but it's some kind of potentially cross-functional meeting, something that we all face, with a desire to come out of that feeling, that I've been present, that I've done what I needed to do in the meeting, and that the folks around me had a good impression, that I built some credibility. So what we did in the course is just to break it down into a few different parts, just so that, again, we're developing practices. So one was, hey, what happens even before I get in the meeting? And I can get very excited about this as a bigger concept, because energy in action happens way before the actual action happens. So if I can begin to set my intention before I even enter a meeting and or room, whether that's Zoom or otherwise, I think it applies to Zoom too, how can I set an intention of how I want to enter? That I like I'm not going to call that a tool or a tip. I'm going to call that a practice, because setting an intention it only can take a few seconds. But what's my intention as I enter? Is it to get a point across? Is it to find out from other people how they feel about a particular topic? Is it to be listening and tuning in to make sure that I can ask some questions that need to be asked? So we start with that. And then there's something about actually physically walking in. And again, I would use the virtual space or the physical space as well, which is, how do you actually enter? For many of the clients I work with, they're often, on their phones, absorbed somewhere else. They're transitioning between whatever they've been doing before and the present moment. And so what I urge people to do is to start just backing things up a little bit, that you enter before you enter. So now we're entering the room, and your presence actually, right, it precedes you. One thing people don't understand is the mood is contagious, and mood can move before you even enter that doorway. I can have some fun on Zoom with people, really looking at what I'm going to assume their moods are by the way in which they enter. Now, we can be wrong about that, but the point is that we're all taking in information, because it's how we're wired as humans. So it's important to be intentional about how you enter. Help clients shoulders down, chin up, make good eye contact, acknowledge. It's another simple thing to improve your presence, is to simply acknowledge those in the room. Again, whether you're on Zoom, being able to say hello, introduce yourself, etc. What do you think? Should I give you the 3, 4, and 5?
Yeah, Adam, what do you think? Do you have any
Yeah,
questions?
I have questions, but they don't directly, they're related to what you said, but they don't relate as
Mhm.
closely as what you're about to say. So I'd say go for it and then pass back to me.
Yeah. And, I don't want to give away the whole course in a way that I'm doing here, but just to give you a flavor that really it's an arc, right, of opening your intention and how you set the mood for when you come into a meeting or a session. Then there's the heart of what happens at the meeting itself. So in the middle of the 5 steps is, how are you sitting? What are you doing to make contact with the others in the room? And then what is your presence in terms of attuning to actually the meat of the meeting? So that's important for folks to be good listeners, to find the right place where there's a pause for you to make your point. So that's what we usually focus on, which is the preparation around the content. That's usually something that most folks understand. But when we keep moving through the meeting, the fourth piece is what happens when you get pushback. A lot of my clients, what happens is they get triggered and their nervous system starts to light up a little bit if they're asked a question or they feel like they don't know the answer to something. Maybe you get cut off. There's a lot going on when you feel potentially resistance, whether it's true or not true. So being able to handle those kinds of pressure points is important. So we talk a little bit about that. And then finally, and this really is the bookend to your intention before you ever set foot in the meeting, is what do you do after? Did you have questions you needed to respond to? Were there folks that you needed to follow up with? Did you promise to do something? I would say that that is all about presence, because you're building credibility with the folks who are in those meetings with you. So that kind of brings us through the whole arc. And I would say the important thing are those bookends. Before you ever even enter, what's your attitude? What's your mood? What do you want to project? And all the way at the end, which is, well, how do you close and complete to give your best impression?
Very cool.
That makes a lot of sense. So I got to admit, I'm curious about kind of another angle. My question may be a little broad, so certainly address part of it or anything that it reminds you of. So when we first started working together, I heard you talk about the person you're helping and their skills, and that made sense. And then I was impressed and frankly kind of surprised when I found out how much you really do care and focus about the organization and their bigger picture. And really, well, I'm sure you'll get into it as we speak, but aligning that leader with the organization, with the greater ecosystem that is bigger than that person. And I know over these years you've developed these skills and this wisdom, and we're putting it out here. And as we're doing that, I'm thinking, what is the experience of your client, meaning the person you're coaching, you're supporting? Specifically, like, do they feel frustrated to not be able to do something? Are they aware of what the skills they don't have and they come to you to fix it? Or do you have to, and so many different ways, but what's the emotional, intellectual experience of people who come to you? Because that's why we're here, to speak to them. What's it like as they encounter you?
Mm. Lots of questions are folded in there. Let me take a couple of them and peel them back. Clients come to coaches in a few ways. Sometimes an organization is making a suggestion to a client. I'll come back to that. That's a unique circumstance. Sometimes a client is making a transition, and it's a great time to have a coach. And sometimes that client may have a company pay for it, but in some cases that client may just say, boy, I'm at a crossroads and I need to be clear about what I'm doing and what my steps are moving forward. Maybe what do I need to leave behind, and what is it I'm moving towards? That's a different kind of work. And sometimes we'll be working with clients in team settings or in more of a consulting kind of a setting, which is around what's a particular outcome or business outcome that's at play, and how do we help a team or an individual support that outcome most effectively. For instance, I'm working with a client now, and he just got a big promotion to head up R&D for a manufacturing company, and he's stepping into new leadership, and he wants to create a center of excellence where he is taking folks from different parts of the organization and building a new org. So getting all of those folks aligned and really helping him be the leader he needs to be, that's our work there.
Hmm.
So I would just like generally say kind of three. Do you want me to talk more about what happens when the organization is looking for something? You
Yeah,
tell me.
Yeah.
whatever kind of makes clear some of the things that we might be imagining.
Yeah, because I keep coming back to systems. I think this is really the focus of my work, and it's something that when I was younger and in my own corporate world, I had a view that everything that happened was a result of something I did or didn't do. A very big sense of accountability. So if something didn't go well, then I must have, done something wrong. If something went well, I kind of had that sense that I got that doggy treat at the end of the day and or a gold star and you know my leadership life in some ways was kind of binary. Um, and I didn't understand the interplay of systems to the degree that I do now. So one thing I'll tell you a really great story. Um, I can be hired by what I'll call the great org. So the org says to a particular client, we need you to be more X, Y, or Z. And it can be positive. Coaching these days is much less remedial than how it started out and much more seen now as an important way to help leaders navigate set intentions, impact the system. So when that happens, what we have to do as coaches is work with our clients to help them see everything that is at play versus, Adam, gee, if you only did more of this, this is the result you would get. We have to step back and really map the system and understand what the system is asking. And as a coach, part of the dance is being able to help a client see the system and then see the ways in which that client maybe is being asked to disrupt a system. That happens oftentimes. Or sometimes it's being asked to really, get with the program and play with the system. So we have to unlock and decode the culture and then figure out how the client can be effective. However, systems change. I had a client, and the brief was this client needed to show up with more executive presence, just to bring it back to our course. And the feedback from the CEO to the client was, you're not showing up the way I need you to in bigger meetings. I need you to speak up. I need you to promote yourself more. You need to be more visible. Now, for this client, who was very introverted, much more of a technical expert, it was a big ask, and to him, it felt very inauthentic. And what was interesting about it was to also notice how my client's boss, so it was the CEO, and then underneath my client's boss, was also sort of on the same bandwagon, like, you've got to be more visible, you need to do this or that. And when I went out, in many of these cases, I'll do a 360 or a set of interviews with other folks in the org to try to get some more data. What came out from the data was that my client was beloved, beloved and credible because he was viewed as being authentic. And for all of the reasons and things he was not doing to promote himself and make himself visible. And yet the currency that my client had was very different from the CEO's. So in that case, we just had to look at it and say, okay, so what's going to be comfortable for you to shift here in order to meet the CEO's request? Now, just to finish up the story, what happened is 3/4 of the way through the engagement, the CEO was asked to step down. And when the CEO was asked to step down, an internal CEO took over who had a completely different set of values and had known my client for a long time and really valued him for what he brought. So as a coach in those situations, I really want to help clients see the bigger landscape and not so much jump to, if only I did more of this, I'm going to get, more gold stars. Like, we really need to understand what's appropriate, given the system these folks are operating in. So that was a lot. Sorry.
No, that's such
No,
a
not
great
sorry. That's why we're
example.
here.
That's such a great example. I think before we close and to respect your time, Julia, there's one thing I think we need to dive into. I love how real coaching situations have basically opened our eyes up to the complexity of coaching, as a system. It's not so much of this is what you want to achieve. This is the assignment or feedback you've received. How do we accommodate this? How do we just in this way, like blindly just adapt that whatever the feedback you've received? I
Right.
didn't realize, right? The feedback can be so mixed. In some ways, could be a detriment to your career path. But I think as women sitting here talking to another female coach, for me, someone who has worked in high tech consulting and advertising for so long, I realized that at one point I too was molded to the expectation, the feedback that was put on me. And only until I became an entrepreneur, there's certain things I started to shed and trying to relearn myself to relearn these skills, which frankly was quite challenging. So I wonder, especially for women listening to this, frankly, women in their 20s, 30s, 50s, and 60s, thinking about that, oh, I need to speak up more. I think that's like the number one feedback is like women don't speak up enough. They don't ask for what they deserve. I kind of just want to get a sense of that because your example, if I were to add some context, right, there's a lot, sometimes the feedback for women for speaking too much coming, for example, from men. And when they did the study, I have to find it, that men were speaking significantly larger portion of that conversation, but was complaining that women were way too vocal, was talking nonstop. So I think women over the years, and I've seen it in families as well, among friends, right? You talk so much. That there's like a lot of mixed signals and false signals, particularly for women in leadership. I kind of just want to see your general take on this and if you ever run into these situations.
It's such a great point because, it's hard to make sweeping generalizations. However, I think that women's voices in the workplace is it's safe to say is generally one of those things where the perception may or may not match reality, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, as a coach, I'm coming in to really help a client have what I call a more objective view of what might actually be happening. And if it works well, what will happen is that let's call it the behavior or the pattern will show up in the coaching sessions, right? And so that gives us really a laboratory to work on what's communication, what's happening well, between us, and how do we unpack that a little bit. But then what I'm helping clients do is to look at the broader system and to depersonalize often what's happening. Because what happens is you just are like, what is going on here? I do not understand this. You're asking me to speak up more. I speak up, and then it feels as if I'm, having my hand slapped for that. So sometimes I can help clients see the system at play, which the system is homeostatic, right? There's usually not someone behind the curtain like the Wizard of Oz, saying, well, this is what we want. But the system will play patterns back, and it can help clients to say, oh, okay, I see what's happening in here, and here's adjustments that I can make that feel comfortable and authentic. Because back to that executive presence, if you're not adapting in a way that's authentic, then it's going to feel really, it's not going to feel genuine. And the other thing, just to finish that off, is you really only need to change, like I say, 1 to 10%. You don't have to make massive changes to have an impact. And so this idea that we have to become someone who we're not, I want to disavow that right at the front end and help clients make the adjustments so that we don't take the Tigger out of Tigger, right? We want people to have their signature moves, so to speak, and keep that intact.
Yeah. It's absolutely wonderful to hear. And then just reminded me something, then this is obviously not sponsored, but one thing I learned as somebody who's organized the meeting, hosted the meeting, especially on Zoom, I use this tool called Fathom to note take. And one of the key feature is your talk time, which is something that I've never really used or seen before. And I'm sure it's hard to do in some of the in-person meetings. And I was really surprised by the results when you look at the percentage of the amount that you're talking, your perception, your memory of how much you spoke. It's actually very different than the reality of it. And I love the fact that, especially when you have multiple participants, you can actually have settings where you can time how much each person has spoken. And I feel like that is such a tremendous value, especially for leadership team to realize that sometimes the loudest voice, the most extroverted person, sometimes do take up more of that space. And how do you navigate as a moderator, as a meeting host to really shift that? So I find some excitement in there as well. Any other questions from you guys before we wrap up? How do we feel? This is good?
Feels good. I've got some ideas for future blog posts for Julia, so I don't want to make her promise them now, but I'm gonna hand them over, and I think they're gonna be fun for the
I
viewers.
I really do think so. I mean, I do want to encourage people to really check out juliaholloway.com, particularly in the blog section, because there's a lot of value in micro moves. Speaking of the 0 to 10%, if people don't resonate immediately with micro moves, that's what we meant, under 10%, sometimes even 1 to 2%. That's like so doable. I would love to encourage us as a team to write more about some of the, I would say hybrid meetings. And it's very troublesome to people in the room and online. It's every time people bring that up to me as like a Zoom host, Zoom webinar person, they're like, oh, I just don't know how to deal with that. So we should definitely have some posts related to that. And with that said, let me just do a little close and then we're good to go. Hey guys, so thank you so much for watching, for listening, wherever you are on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. That was Julia Holloway, and she's one of our favorite friends. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, I highly recommend you check out her brand new course, and it's free. It's called Executive Presence, Small Moves, Big Presence. Speaking of which, she has a newsletter on her website, which you can find right away, or juliaholloway.com/newsletter. It's all about micro moves. She only sends out 1 or 2 newsletters a month, packed with a lot of practical advice. So definitely check it out, share with your colleagues and friends. So yeah, that's everything. And if this episode sparked something for you, share it with a friend. Drop us a line, find us on social media. We'd love to continue the conversation somehow. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.